financial advice to the long-term plan preparation.
Okay. This morning's workshop, councillors, is on the financial strategy and the infrastructure strategy at a very high level. You have been sent the information from Taituara on the dollars and cents manual, and there were just a couple of pages of that that are particularly relevant for today's presentation, and that was around the Local Government Act regulations and sections that pertain to what both of these documents must contain. And so today is the opportunity. We're going to go through and highlight some of these features and these facts, and it's the opportunity for you to ask questions. We will touch on a high level the current financial situation of the council, some of the issues that will be facing us for this LTP. It is no secret that this LTP will be the hardest LTP in local government history because of the government reforms, the uncertainty of the timing, the likelihood that there will be changes post-election, and plus also this council has a very strong drive for delivery for a lot of our infrastructure projects and the implications that that will have. But this LTP is really the LTP of delivery. And it's up to you. You will give us the direction on how you want that to look. So today's session is about giving you that high level for you to engage in open conversation so we can actually get some kind of indication of the various options we will present to you through this process for you to make the best decisions for your community. So without further ado, I will go ahead and start the presentation. Fantastic. Yes, that's us too. Okay. I haven't made avatars of all of you, but I have of some of you. And isn't it interesting the way people see you? Okay. So Jason will start.
Thank you, Vincy. Look, this is a session that I've been waiting for a long time to have a discussion around the financial strategy. And this is a really important document along with the infrastructure strategy that they link together, they line up together, and this is really Councillor's first chance to have a discussion around what strategy you would like to see for the next long-term plan. And really it's around a guide for council and a guide for staff in terms of how we go about, I guess, running the organisation from a financial sense. And in terms of talking sense, in terms of dollars and cents, it's very clearly around prudence. And so the dollars and cents manual that Vince had sent out is really key in terms of just understanding some of those concepts. So really the financial strategy takes our vision, it identifies some of our long-term infrastructure challenges and our drivers, and aligns with the community in terms of understanding how we manage and certainly how we understand the financial consequences of our steps that we take. And the financial strategy covers many things. It covers our rates, it covers our debt levels, it covers how much debt headroom, it covers how we want to fund things, it covers our capital, and this is really the chance to get out of councillors what it is you want to see going forward within the parameters and the financial challenges that we face, and we can have a discussion around some of those as well. And really the last bullet point is just this, that holistic and aligned financial and service reality to our vision. So it's really putting your vision into practice. Vince had sent out a presentation, I think James was the avatar who presented that one, around some of the key things around the legislative requirements for a financial strategy. One of the first ones is really around Section 100, having a balanced budget. very simply making sure that our operating revenues and our expenditure link in and tie, that we're really not capitalising operating costs going forward, so that we're living within our means from a financial sense. Section 101 talks about the prudent financial management, and I've sort of covered some of that around prudence and just making sure that we consider that in everything that we do. And Section 101A, financial strategy, this is where the key is. It's a guide, so that we use when we consider making decisions and how we fund things and just the whole business of council, put simply.
Right, and of course, there's also the legislative drivers for the infrastructure strategy. The big difference being the infrastructure strategy has to have the projected projects, build, and budget for 30 years, whereas your financial strategy is only for 10 years with the LTP. For the obvious reasons, it's because when we're dealing with infrastructure, we're talking about a longer life of the assets, and you need to adequately plan for those 30 years into the future, okay? We also have a number of policies and some statements, some financial statements that must be included with your LTP. We must adopt them along with the LTP, and often, for instance, with the revenue and financing policy, you must adopt it prior to the LTP. It's usually done in the same meeting because that is how you set your rates for your long-term plan. We also have a number of policies that can be adopted before the LTP, and that will be at meetings prior. And an example of that will be your significance and engagement policy. So those things will come to you in due course, and our workshop on October the 10th is when we introduce some of those policies. And we will have Bronwyn Larkins, our senior policy advisor, present at this workshop to go over those policies for you. Okay. There are some key considerations, and it always comes down to how you balance affordability to your levels of service. That's the key issue. And how are you going to fund those services, your programs, and your projects? As said before, both the financial and infrastructure strategies must be hand in glove. So Jason and I have to work very closely together. I'll be working with the infrastructure team. I have been liaising with a few of them already, so I can identify some of the key issues coming up, which I will highlight here at the high level. But we will be working very closely together because it's so important these two documents tell the same story. Different aspects of the story, but the same story. You have to answer the question and ask yourselves, what is deliverable and affordable? And that's a question that we will pose to you because you decide that for your communities that you represent. One of the key things is, are we going to lower, maintain, or raise levels of service? All of those have financial implications, which we will explain. Are we looking at new assets for the community? You have a very high forward work program with some key assets that you're committed to. So you need to actually consider the timing of those. Have we got it right on the current schedule? Do you want to bring something forward? Do you want to defer something? Are you going to add new to the mix? Everything comes with a financial caveat attached to it. And how do we balance that financial resilience that you must have with rates affordability? By and large, the mayor has indicated that, of course, the community is comfortable paying rates when they can see what they get for them. Would you agree, Your Worship? Yeah. And it's about transparency and accountability and ensuring whatever rates are set, we're very clear in our messaging what that means for our community. And how much do we rely upon and use any investment income that this council may have? And Jason is the resident expert to talk about that further. So we have some tensions, of course. You have key objectives. You have to fund the delivery of facilities of services. You have to fund optimized capital renewals programs. You have to appropriately fund your service growth. And remember, growth in this district is economic growth. And we need to do more to boost economic growth to generate that population growth that we're seeking. You also have to maintain prudent debt-to-income ratios and your safe level of debt headroom. We will be explaining that later on in this presentation. And you have to maintain and acknowledge acceptable rates increases. In order to deliver some of the key objectives and the infrastructure projects, rates will go up and borrowing is probably inevitable, but the choices are completely up to you, and we will take our direction from what you decide you want. So the mayor's voice here. Your role as a council is to help set this strategic direction and monitor the delivery. You need to abide by certain principles in setting these strategies. We need to be talking about fairness and equity to current and future generations. And what we mean by that, and a key example, is we're not talking equality because that assumes everybody's at the same level to begin with, but with equity, we recognize that there will be people in different sectors or levels on the socioeconomic scale, and so some of our rates are going to have larger impacts on some groups, particularly marginalized groups. And an example is if you have your UAGC, or your Uniform Annual General Charge, the higher that is, the more it impacts lower income people, because it's a set fee regardless of property values. So that's something to keep in mind as we go through when you're actually determining the levels you want your UAGC to be at, as opposed to your rates based on property values. It's important that you abide by the principle that current ratepayers need to pay for the services available to them currently, including those infrastructure assets that they are using, okay? So we can't defer artificially. It's not prudent to do so that future users are paying for current users. You're not subsidizing the next generation, or this next generation is not to subsidize the current generation. That's what that prudent financial accountability is meaning. But it is important that the future ratepayers do contribute to their fair share for the benefits that they get, which is why for big infrastructure projects, you debt fund that, and you have what we call intergenerational equity, which means that the future generations are paying for the use of those services as well, because they get a benefit. So that, again, brings us down to the principles of fairness. Everybody pays their fair share. That's what the principles in the LGA are saying. Okay.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about financials, both in terms of this slide and the next one, and then there's a few more around our debt levels and our current debt and our debt headroom. But this is just a quick slide from the 23-24 annual plan, just really to reinforce on the left-hand side is where does our money go? This is from an operational perspective only, and where does our money come from? And so really rates is 55% of our total revenue. certainly subsidies and grants at 22% and fees and charges at 18%. And on the left-hand side, you can see that from an operational sense, Roedean there at 24%, and I think Three Waters, when you add them together, around 23-24% as well. So large infrastructure basis, recreation and leisure at 19% of spend as well, which is our pools and libraries and a lot of those areas as well. So I'll go into some of that in more detail later on. And this is our capital works program for 23-24, 81.7 million budget. Big spend on Three Waters, pretty much the same spend on roading and footpaths, and recreation and leisure, of course, with some of the, I guess, the Egantai and the theatre role spend as well in that space. So it's a really ambitious capital program. One of our challenges going forward is we need to be very aware of how large a capital program that we do choose to have from a renewals perspective and then from a new asset perspective as well. Because obviously, given our income streams, high capital potentially leads to some high debt and some high borrowings as well. So as part of this financial strategy, I really want to get a sense from councillors where they see the size of the capital program, where they see the size of rates, numbers, and those sorts of things as well.
One thing to keep in mind, even though we're saying that there's quite high spend here, your level of service and your delivery in infrastructure capital has increased over the years. So you are delivering more. Whereas previously you used to deliver about 30 million a year, you're now, in this past year, it was around 55 million. You've reached as high as 70 million in the past 3 years. So this really is a period of delivery to the community of key infrastructure projects that are needed. So you are helping to set up the scene for future generations to have really good, robust infrastructure. And that does come at a cost. It's a short-term pain for very long-term gains.
And I think it's really key over the last long-term plan. We've sort of spent $185 million in capital work over those 3 years, and before that it really was at that 30 million. And that has seen our debt increase, but it's certainly delivered services both in terms of maintenance and new assets that the community has sought. And this LTP needs to continue with delivery, but also really focus on that affordability as well.
This is a council in casual observation as a layperson that really punches above its weight for its delivery, which is to be commended. And it is something that will be recognized in the annual report forthcoming. Okay, do you have any questions about that information? I'll take that as everybody's okay with that. Yes, could you exit, please? Sorry, we'll just go back to our normally scheduled presentation in just a moment. Okay.
All right, for the next wee while, I'm going to talk about some of our current financial parameters, and I want to talk about our current financial state, some of our funding sources, which Lindsay's going a bit fast on, and our current debt levels, our current debt, and our debt headroom. So in terms of, if you just go back to that one, so just as a reminder, net assets, $1.7 odd million. A big chunk of that, about 700 million of that is Three Waters revenue. Okay. And just a reminder that our total revenue is about 128 million, our operating expenditure is 122. Our capital program, as was highlighted on the previous presentation, 81.7, of which we're looking at about new borrowing of 43 million in terms of that. So I think that's fine, we can move on. And if we go to the current funding sources.
Okay.
Just like that, I think that's the timing doesn't seem to be pushing in and out.
We have problems with this setup in here. Jess?
I have no idea what it's
It's fine, just go down and we can just...
I can't
Oh, you can't
operate
move,
with this. We really need a keyboard here.
So these are some of the things I do want to cover off in terms of really, we have to have a good discussion around debt. We all need to understand where we are, what our parameters are, what our headroom is, what we want to see going forward. In terms of our funding sources, as I mentioned before, 55% of our funding comes from rates. Rates makes up about $70 million of our total revenue, along with $58 million of non-rates. It's a bit higher in terms of the 23-24 annual plan because we are getting a lot more through subsidies and grants, which we sort of call unguaranteed because we're getting it for 23-24, but we don't quite know what's going to go forward. And so we need to be very careful with our expenditure that we don't overcommit on the basis that we're getting some fees and some subsidies and grants. I also want to talk about some of our reserve funds that we've got, just so that we understand what the restricted reserves are and what the designated reserves are, because they are funding that we do have. And part of one of our funding sources is also loans. So in terms of restricted reserves, these, I think, how much do we have? We've got 18.7 million in restricted reserves. These are really subject to really specific conditions which council cannot revise. So these are bequests from individuals to, say, museum or art gallery, but it also includes our targeted rates reserves for our works and services areas too, which we spend, and we spend in those areas, but of course we've got to spend in those areas. So there's about 18.7 million sitting in those areas. We then have about 25 million in designated reserves. And this is maintained for funding activities which we do determine. So this is where some of our depreciation funds sit. It's where some of the Three Waters reserves sit. It's where our contingency money and our disaster reserve sits as well. So they're not cash funds, but we can use them as internal sources of fund to reduce external debt. So I think it's really important that we do understand that we can use some of that funding as well. So if we move on to loans, so the loans are governed by a financial strategy and our liability management policy. And as Vinci was talking before, in terms of intergenerational equity, loans provide that mechanism to fund long-term assets over a long term. We generally repay loans over 25 to 30 years, but in some cases the assets are depreciated over a longer period, whether it be 50 to 80 years. And the council participates in the LGFA, the local government funding agency, to minimise our borrowing costs. Sorry, I should have mentioned at the start, I'm happy to take questions on the way through rather than wait till the end if we want to talk about any of that stuff that I've just sort of covered off.
Jace, we might just pause for a moment. Councillor Piddington's with us, so I'll just get him to introduce himself, just because he was late this morning.
Hi, Stu Piddington, second term councillor. Cheers.
Just, Jason, you talked about the example. Do you have an example of when we've depreciated over a 50 to 80 years? Because obviously that's Councillor Booth's big beef about the theatre.
Yes,
So
we
I'd
have
love
a few.
to some examples.
Yeah, we have a few examples. So if you look at the Caroline Bay, so Caroline Bay, when it was built, it's not going to last 80 years. And so I'm not even going to guess how long it was depreciated, but let's say it's got a lifetime of, I don't know, 20 years.
What's that?
Caroline Bay, the sea bay. And so it may have a lifetime of whatever it is. And so we borrow the money and we will depreciate over that time period and repay the debt. Something like the theatre, which is modelled at 80 years in terms of the life of that asset, we will borrow the funding, we'll pay it off over 25 to 30 years because it's just, we don't borrow for specific projects, we borrow for the program of work, but the theatre will be depreciated over 80 years and therefore the ratepayers of Timaru will pay it off over 80 years. Is the plan. And there's other assets, so some of Andrew's infrastructure work might last 100 years, some will be 20 years, some will be 30 years.
Yeah, Andrew, do you want to come up and explain, because roads and our water networks are effectively financed and the asset renewal of them out over an extended period of time. Bridges are the same, but Andrew, do you want to explain that?
But also going back to our papers, was it last week, the schedules as far as depreciation rates were sitting in there based on asset classes on what would be normal. So I think property and property improvements was between 1% and 10%. Obviously, this is at the lower end because it's a brand new build within the museum side of things, and so that would be normal within a parameter, wouldn't it?
Explain the depreciation, roads and bridges and water networks.
Yeah, so with the infrastructure assets, we do depreciate them over a long period of time, but in some cases, so roads, for instance, the actual base course layer of a road is depreciated over about 100 years. And then as you get further up the layers, which was where more wear and tear, it gets less and less. So I think, you basically the top surface layer, your seal is depreciated over 20 years. So they do vary in that respect. Likewise, pipes generally are depreciated, depending on the material, like a plastic pipe, polyethylene, or a PVC is depreciated over 100 years, whereas an AC pipe, for instance, which we know has a shorter lifespan, is depreciated only over 70 years. So they are very. Pump station, mechanical plant, generally 25, 30 years. So there's different depreciation rates and depending on their life. It's all linked to that. Of course, depreciation is also linked to the actual replacement cost. So, that does change every time we revalue the asset.
Andrew, it's an interesting point around road depreciation, because effectively under our model we have to depreciate that asset, but Waka Kotahi aren't depreciating and allowing for any funding in that regard, are they? So operating under two different models.
Yeah, with roads, yes, we do get the Waka Kotahi, I guess, financial assistance for roads. So, yeah, we only are depreciating our local share of those roads, yeah.
Yeah, and my comparison would be to a state highway, as an example. They won't be depreciating, they're just funding replacement effectively, aren't they, in R&M?
I believe that's the case, so yeah, I don't think that they apply depreciation at all because, yeah, it's cash funded effectively. Yeah.
And I think the reason that depreciation is so key is it's how that's the life of the asset and that's how we fund it. And so if you have the theatre over 80 years versus 30 years, it really makes a significant difference, because if you're going to repay it back over a short period of time, your ratepayers will pay a heck of a lot more. So it's about trying to find that equity and fairness that sort of Vinci has talked about to ensure that the life of the asset is reasonable, and so that each year we put 1/80th or 1/50th of it aside from the current generation. And so that's how the sort of intergenerational thing works, is that people pay today, the people that come in the future in terms of growth then carry on sort of contributing to that as well. So the depreciation rates, they're boring, but they're really, really key.
Depreciation is for the renewal of the asset. That's what the principle behind it is. Of course, in reality, you never actually probably get enough over those years to actually fully fund a renewal of that asset, because rates continue to go up. Your amount of your funding depreciation that you're funding in the early years is probably not going to be equivalent to the later years. But, yeah.
I wouldn't have thought depreciation rates weren't exciting, Jason.
No, they're not.
Can we, Councillor Parker's joined us. Could you just introduce yourself for those on live stream?
Good morning, and I apologise for being late. I'm Councillor Parker. I'm a third term councillor, and I'm Chair of Infrastructure.
Actually, if I could make, I guess, one point. If we think about the 23-24 long-term plan, so we started off with rates at around 20% and we got down to 11.1. It's worth remembering that the way we did that was to borrow for the depreciation for that, the additional time. So one of the key things in this financial strategy that I would like to really explore is how we treat depreciation. Lots of councils rate for renewals and replacements, and they just do that only, whereas they don't rate for the new levels of service and the new buildings and some of those things. So I think it's a key funding decision that around the table we really need to explore and flesh out more, because at the moment we arguably rate fully for depreciation, where not every council fully does it. So I think there's some discussions that we can have around some of that, because remembering we only got to 11.1% because we funded depreciation through a little bit of capital.
Sorry, according to the IRD, around depreciate. Useful life of a building is 50 years maximum. So therefore not anything past that. I went to an infrastructure a symposium up in the local government conference just recently and seen an example of civic facilities being built, and they were actually working on 30 years maximum. So 80 years seems and it wasn't that long ago we spent a lot of money on that theatre. Okay, so that was only about, maybe 30 years. That's significant. So, really 30 years is, and perhaps 50 is max on a new build. So I cannot see how you can justify 80 years.
And we can do some modelling. So part of, some of the boring stuff behind the scenes, so we've got a financial system, Magic, which we're using, which enables us to do some real-life modelling. So we'll be able to model the theatre over 30, 50, 80 and see what the impacts are. And we can have the discussion around whether 80 is the right useful life from our depreciation, from our accounting policies and our depreciation rates. It sort of fits within it. But I take your point around the IRD rates, which is slightly different.
And do these numbers take into consideration the operational costs of that asset or the liability to the council, to the ratepayer for the life of that asset?
The operating budgets include the op model, the operating costs, whereas the capital budgets do not, no, because it's an operating cost.
Jason, just when we made that decision, we aren't actually doing full depreciation because we didn't have the money to do that, and we picked a number. But
For the annual plan.
for the annual
Yes,
plan,
we did.
yep.
Yep.
But I mean, that in theory is going, so what happens to the shortfall?
Well, we're actually spending, and so as Andrew will say, because the depreciation is to fund renewals and replacements, so we've still got our road end renewals, we've still got our Three Waters costs which are going, so we're still spending it. We just budgeted it out of debt for that annual plan, so that as part of this long-term plan we could address it going forward, because it's not a sustainable option at all.
Just, I'd like to point out that, our assets are getting towards the end of their useful life. It was the growth of Timaru District was probably around the 1940s, 50s, and that's where a lot of infrastructure was installed. That hence is now getting towards the end of its useful life. So the amount we're having to spend on renewals is quite significant, and it's probably matching the depreciation, if not slightly greater.
So just on that point, Andrew, what have we got coming that we don't know about? Does that include bridges at the end of their useful life? I mean, to me, we kind of sit here and we hear these things but don't see any numbers, and then we're kind of shocked when they land.
I see, bridges is probably one of the key ones that is in front of us. There's a massive hump up there. Bridges are extremely expensive to replace, and we've been focusing a lot of the smaller, short length span ones, but we've got some really large ones coming up, and potentially $10-20 million for a bridge replacement.
And so, and I mean, that's been highlighted, across Canterbury with our submission, didn't it, Councillor Parker, in regard to some of those, Canterbury assets, if you look at Rangitata or Kaya, those sort of assets need to be replaced as well. There's a lot of things in the similar age bracket, effectively. There's bridges and there's pipes and there's all those things. I think one of the and some of that will come out through the asset management planning side of it. So we've obviously, as elected members, we're pretty keen to deep dive into that and understand what's in there. The other thing that I just want to challenge everyone on is, yes, we're going to have some of these challenges around the level of capital spend needed over the next 10 or 20 years, but let's also challenge our thinking on how we deliver it, because we've done the same model for a long, long time. So just think about, is there any other alternative ways we can achieve any of what we deliver? At the moment we just go straight to the market and contract out water renewals, as an example. Is there a hybrid model? Should council actually have a team that's, and you might not like hearing this, but I'm pretty keen to challenge everyone's thinking, is should council have a team that is focusing on, small main renewals as an example that's in-house versus external. I just want to challenge everyone's thinking on how we deliver this and and have a look at some comparisons versus other councils as well.
I thought you were going to sell our bridges to China, Nigel. We were going to challenge our thinking.
Well, just one other thing is everything's all about prudence, and obviously we are here and now, and interest rates have tripled. So we were talking about 2%, and now we're 6%, and so everything we're doing here has to be reflected at 6%. Is that what you've done?
We use bill rates, and that's part of the long-term plan which we're creating. So we have just received the bill rates, which we will use. I can't tell you off the top of my head what they are, but you're dead right. And so, as the Mayor was talking to, we can't approach this long-term plan because there's been a lot of changes. Interest rates, they have then driven our construction costs, so 20% for parks, 20% for a lot of areas that we faced during the annual plan. So those numbers, even though they're baked into the annual plan, we're still under incredible cost pressures. So the times have changed, and that's why the 30-year infrastructure strategy is so key. The activity management plans, so councillors will see each activity management plan for every part of the business. You'll get to see their levels of service, you'll get to see their proposed operating spend, you'll get to see their capital spend, and it's that point, because we can't keep doing what we're doing. We'll have double-digit rates if we just keep going. So something needs to change. It's whether it's levels of service up or down, it's whether we look at depreciation differently, it's whether we look at our current BAU costs and really challenge whether we need to make savings. It's the size of our capital program. So you'll see each activity management plan, and it's at that point, because then if they're approved, we go away and cost it. And we need at that point for them to be challenged, for them to be critiqued, because that'll form the basis of what we do going forward. And Vince will talk a little bit about activity management plans at the end of this presentation.
Yep. Sorry, just carrying on from that, but probably Andrew, in regards to your, obviously the infrastructure is the big, the capital spend on infrastructure. Is that backed? If that, you say a pipe needs replaced because it's 50 years old, but actually, is that based on fact, as in it's fallen to pieces, or have you actually done a thorough infrastructure inspection of and recognising what's actually failing? Because those pipes in the ground may still be perfectly fine for another 50 years. So is it based on, oh, that's old and we need to replace it, or is it actually based on the fact that actually it's decaying and it's starting to fall to bits? Because that makes a hell of a difference.
Yeah, we do a lot of modelling behind the scenes in regard, particularly with pipes. So we have regular inspections of sewer lines. We're using CCTV through the lines and having a look at the condition of them. With water mains, it's a little bit more difficult. You can't look inside them. But every time we do a connection or repair, we actually take a sample of the pipe and get that tested to see what the wall thickness is. So it is very much, our renewal program is based on the condition of the pipe, the type of material the pipe is. We know that AC fails a lot earlier than, cast irons and those pipes. Yeah. We know that concrete water mains, which we're replacing in Pleasant Point at the moment, that they do leak around the joints. So it's based on industry standards, our own testing, and condition assessments. So we develop a model. You're quite correct. We have pipelines out there that are over 100 years old that are still perfectly okay.
Sorry, Andrew, on that point with the water mains, Hadley and Brunton have like a drone tech or something that they put through the water pipe, don't they? To check joints, so they do have.
What was that?
Hadley and Brunton's they put something through water mains to check joints, etc. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, it is still difficult getting into those water mains because they're under pressure. And so if you shut down a water main, you can access through a hydrant and put cameras down through there. Yeah, we have done that. You've got to be careful too with public health and that the equipment that goes down there has to be fully sterilised.
No, I get that. But if you're, I guess, you know, it's a cost benefit. If you were weighing that up, if you had a 10-kilometre pipeline that you thought that was end of life, it would probably make sense in spending the $10,000 to understand whether it's got another 20 years of life, or you're going to rip it up and, you know, spend a couple of million to replace it. It's probably, yeah.
Yeah, one of the main reasons around water supply is, we look at failures as well, and how many failures we get on a particular section of line, you know, and unfortunately, you know, water mains, it is hard to predict them, and you can sweat the assets and push the risks a bit more, but then community would have to accept a greater number of failures, greater number of water outages.
The Wellington model.
Wellington model, exactly. That's probably a classic example of sweating the asset.
Just going back to fiscal prudence, page in the Tuatara document, 3.1. It talks about balanced budget benchmark in regards to revenue, and that excludes income and development contributions, financial contributions, revaluation gains, or on derivative financial instruments, invested assets. And then there's also, so we're operating an unbalanced budget, aren't we? Yeah. And
Sorry, we have a balanced budget. Year 2 of the long-term plan, there was the district plan was going to be funded, which is an operating cost through debt, and that threw out an unbalanced budget that year. It's not the end of the world having an unbalanced budget, but at this stage we do have a balanced budget. The things that you were talking about just then is really good because there's certain types of revenue which you can't count as revenue. Sometimes they're invested assets which they're non-cash, so of course you can't carry them through. And so that's what we've got to be very careful with, some of that unguaranteed revenue, which is revenue, but it's not revenue that we can count for our balanced budget, or we can count for our debt to revenue ratio. So there are some differences which you're pointing out then, but we do have a balanced budget.
also mentions around debt servicing benchmarks and not to exceed 10% of rates.
Yeah, my next slide.
Sorry, I just want to go back to depreciation. I didn't get a chance to ask it again. I'm interested in not so much the rate you land on, but the process on how you get to that rate. So the policy is, 1% to 30%. How do you, what kind of information, or how do you collaborate, what you land on, and do you compare it to what other councils use?
Generally, I think what Andrew answered before was fantastic in terms of how they assess the condition of their assets and the like. And so he's got industry benchmarks, he's got other councils. So I think in the infrastructure space, I would say that it's really clear in terms of our depreciation rates. I think where it gets a bit not looser is around some of the above assets, the vertical. And so if we use the theatre as an example, and so what I'm hearing is that through the IRD rates and some of the other things, other councils do put them out because in a way it's easier over a longer term, but it's still got to match the life of the asset. And so the advice that we got at that point around the theatre was that clearly it's an 80-year asset, so we chose to put it out over that. Sea Bay, 20-year asset, because of course chlorine, corrosive, all that sort of stuff. Some of their kit will break down earlier or need replacement earlier. The building might last this long. So it really is an analysis around each asset type.
I think here too, you get a degree of assurance around the process from what audit do with our LTP and then our annual report. So when we do our LTP, audit get hold of our infrastructure strategy and our asset and activity management plans, particularly around the big areas where the money really is at stake, like the three waters and the roading, and they are assessed essentially by a group of, by a team to ensure that in Audit New Zealand, and they may even bring in outside expertise to support them in that. They do. And what that does is that's looked at across the country. So they get, they look at our asset data and give it quite quite a scrutiny, and then that's assessed in terms of not just what we're providing, but it is measured against others. When they come to audit the annual report, they then look at what, and this is the vexed question that we often go on about revaluations and so on. They look at the value of the network, but they also look closely at the depreciation and the condition of that network and how we're assessing it. So these issues about the fact that audit are saying that there is a reasonable basis for reliance on what we're putting into our documents become really, really important, because it is underlying that is the quality of the information that goes into the asset assessments and the conditions that inform our activity management plans, our asset management plans, and our infrastructure strategies. And they get quite a scrutiny from audit, and they get it from people who are well versed in activity and asset management, particularly around infrastructure. So it's not it's not, to go back to your point, Councillor Booth, it's not like an IRD where they say, here's a car, or here's a motorbike, here's a forklift, here's the rate of depreciation. There's a really strong process around how they determine what is the condition of the asset, and that comes including from the quality of the data, and that's then measured and scrutinised and tested by an independent group of people. So it is, I think, what you can, and if you look into our infrastructure strategy, you'll see that our water and wastewater networks are in reasonable condition overall, and they're not. If you look at it, we colour code the expected life of those assets, and there's quite a bit of life left in a number of those assets. So that's been subject to a lot of challenge and scrutiny.
Yeah, I guess there are some issues coming up, particularly in the roading side of things. The one I will point out is we're only replacing about 5 kilometres a year of roads and renewals. You work that out over a 1700k network. Effectively, you're asking your roads to last about 200 to 250 years. It's just not going to happen. So, but we're still managing that through additional maintenance and extending lives, etc. that way. So, but potentially in the future, that's going to be a bit of a hump, I guess, another hump that's coming up. It could be 10 years away, it could be 30 years away. We don't know at this stage.
That won't be uncommon with local authorities, though, across the country. It's actually it's a
we're not
national
alone.
issue.
No, it's a major issue.
It's a major issue.
So it
Because
actually comes down to it's a local government problem, but it's also a central government.
It's a
very
national.
much so.
Yeah, it's a national.
It's a funding problem, isn't it?
Yes.
Who holds 92% of the funding? We can find them a solution.
Yeah.
This is a national problem in terms of the roading and the bridge network, because a lot of it, again, happened post-World War II, and of course the vehicles since then have become much heavier and a lot more frequent. So if you think about the roads that went in the 50s, 60s and 70s, they weren't, I don't think, anticipated to have the use and put on them that they have now.
No, far from, yeah. And you're looking at one truck is equivalent to 10,000 cars when it comes to actual damage to the road. You know, and the number of trucks that are on our roads these days compared to what they were back in the 60s, it's a phenomenal increase. So,
And if actually government recognised the economic activity in our funding model, then actually we'd probably be able to work towards a solution a lot quicker ourselves, wouldn't we?
fully support you.
Fully support, yeah.
Yeah, and interesting we'll flick that around actually, the draft submission to the GPS on what is it, land transport, isn't it, technically?
The GPS.
Yeah, highlights the underspend across Canterbury in their last GPS versus, well, and probably proposed. So effectively Canterbury's had a real underspend in roading and infrastructure associated with roading, probably back, goes back to the earthquakes, doesn't it, effectively? That would be my analysis of it.
You know, I'd probably go off on a little bit of a tangent here, sidetrack, but you know, if you look at the actual income regarding from fuel excise duty, road user charges, it's been flat-lined for the last probably 6, maybe 9 years, I think it is, because, you know, vehicles are becoming more efficient. They're not using as much fuel. Although we've got increased travel, the actual use of those fuels is remaining the same. And of course, with electric vehicles coming online, those electric vehicles are actually paying nothing towards the road at the moment because they're not charged any road user charge. There's no fuel excise duty. So.
I believe National have said that they're looking at that in their policy to look to move to kilometres.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
For, to address that concern.
It needs to happen.
Yeah.
Sorry, just an aside, Andrew, on that roading thing, I think we need to have that discussion so the public's aware. And when we have groups come in here and want 2Ks extended on their road, we actually need to paint the full picture. As you say, with what we're funding at the moment, actually, we've got a couple of humps coming in a big way, and they may be on main arterial routes. So I think it goes back to what the Mayor said. We've got to deep dive in some of this stuff and not fritter it away. If we actually do have some serious spending to do, it should be in the right spot. But I think we all need to be aware of that.
Yeah. And the asset management plans will be the opportunity to do that.
I was just going to mention that. That's a good question, Councillor Paddington. And the activity management plan is the time. So this council previously has not seen activity management plans. They haven't been published before. So it's really the contract for each activity, roading. So it's the chance to really, what is our level of service? Can we keep doing 5 kilometres of resealed? What does it look like? Then our community can really ask the questions. Actually, that's not good enough. We want more. And so we can go, right, well, this is what it costs. This is what it looks like. And these are the humps that are coming. So for each activity, you'll have that stuff in detail. You'll be able to dive right down. I wouldn't mind moving on to debt, if that was okay. So just answering Councillor Booth's question from a while ago. So these are our credit limits as set out in our liability management policy. So these are from the LGFA. So net annual interest expense will not exceed 30% of total annual rates income. Net annual interest expense will not exceed 20% of total revenue. And our net debt will not exceed 280%. Note that Council did set the 210% in the last financial strategy, and liquidity will be greater than 110% in terms of our current assets over our current liabilities. So that's what our current liability management policy says. As part of the long-term plan, we can revisit some of those areas, and certainly as part of the financial strategy, we'll have a look at that net debt to revenue ratio as well.
That's different to local government New Zealand.
I'm curious, you just mentioned 10% before. That's what
I'm just reading out of the Tuatara here. That's where it says that.
Yeah, so these were set by LGFA and adopted by Timaru District Council.
It does say borrowing costs are less than 10% of operating revenue as defined in the balanced budget benchmark. So if we're not operating a balanced budget, I guess you can...
We are operating a balanced budget. These were the guidelines that were adopted by Council at the last long-term plan.
For those who are not operating a balanced budget, it's 15% of operating revenue.
Sorry, can you just read that again?
It's on page 3.1. It's on figure 3.1. It's in the wee box there.
It's page 16.
Oh, just two. And that's the benchmarks of fiscal prudence. And previous in our strategy, I noted that we actually have been 10 and 15%. So 10% of rates and 15% of total revenue.
So those are the financial prudence measures that, so in our annual report, we report against those those prudence measures. And so at the moment, of course, we're within the 10%. We just have a policy, and I'm not sure exactly why, but 30%. But we are meeting all those prudence graphs. And if you look at the last page of our annual report, those are where those graphs exist. So if we move on to the next slide, Vince.
Sorry, I mean, I'd just say, councillor Booth, I'd have thought we were going to be well and truly inside those. I
Oh,
mean,
we are, yeah.
If you, whether you take it at 10% of rates would mean our borrowing costs, which essentially interest and charges like that, would have to be in the order of 7 million. But if it's operating revenue, then it's in the order of 12 million, and our financing costs are well below that. They're, 4 million or something like that. So we're very comfortably and really comfortably inside those sort of margins, I'd have thought.
Yeah, no, it was just the fact that they were different to what I was looking at in here. And I guess that we need to take appreciation, though, of actually the current interest rates, not actually what we've got locked in. And so whatever that is the number. And if you're going to borrow $200 million at 6%, that's 12 million per year.
Yeah,
So it's getting up there.
Yeah, no, and that's a fair point. And so we'll be using the bill interest rates going forward, which will reflect some of that information. One of the things to be aware of course, is that we've locked in some interest. We've got interest rate hedging and things in place. And for the next few years, we're actually paying our weighted average cost of capital is actually very low. And going forward, it's something we need to be aware of. In terms of debt and borrowings, as at 31 July, I think we've gone the page too far, but as at 31 July, our borrowings were $205 million, with a net debt position at $165 million. And of course, as we all know, the difference between the 205 and the 165 is the cash reserves that we hold. Just while Vince is going to the page. Our debt to revenue ratio as at 31 July 2023 is 131%. We're just catching up now. And what I found interesting from the Miles presentation from Bancorp was that as at 30 June 22, the average debt to revenue ratio for Timaru at that point was 122%, and for all the local authorities across the country was 91%. So we're not totally out of whack with the average of the councils. There are some councils with a significantly higher amount. And of course our current limit is 210, so at the moment we're comfortably within it. And if we move to the next slide. Vinci, if we move on, please. So our net debt is 165. And what I'm trying to do here is talk about a net debt headroom as at the moment. So if we take away all the unguaranteed revenue, the things that we can't guarantee that we're going to receive in the future, and it'd be unwise and not prudent to include, we have debt headroom if we maintain a 210% policy of 59.6. And if we go out to the 2.8 as per LGFA, 134.7 million of debt headroom left. It gets complicated. So on the next slide, I've got two slides, one that I'll talk to and then one that Vinci will talk to around Three Waters. Because Three Waters...
Sorry, Jace, can you go back to that one? Go back a slide. I guess part of my concern is we do the here and now. I'd like to see that number because on simplistic terms, if we did the theatre at 46 million, 210% in my simple mind is we've got under 10 million left in headroom where we sit now.
Yeah, it's not quite as simple as that, but when we spread it out over a period of time, and I guess what I'm trying to show is here and now, this is some of the headroom. And of course, waters complicates it, whether it's in or out of what we're doing. And so if we do move on to the next slide around Three Waters.
Sorry, I want to go back though. What I want to know in the future is when we make big decisions like the theatre, upgrading the art gallery and the stadium, what effect it has on those numbers. Because you say it's not quite correct. So am I 5 million out? Am I 40 million out? Because it doesn't give me a lot of confidence.
Yeah. So in the long-term plan 21-31, the financial strategy includes numerous graphs, one of them which shows the financial strategy. So the former council, 21-31 council, signed off those debt levels which peaked at 282.88 in year 9 or whatever. So that is the time, once you've done all the activity management plans, once you've challenged everything, I'll come back and go, all right, here's what it looks like for the next 10 years. And that'll take into account the theatre decision. We can do some modelling with, for argument's sake, that in and out. We can then play around with things to get it at a limit that councillors are comfortable with.
Yeah, no, I get that, but I also, Councillor Booth's point on interest rates, when we did that 3 years ago, the interest rates were 2, not 6% on the borrowing. So I guess going forward, what I'd like is something that moves with us, not a snapshot in time every 3 years.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. You want to be able to see it in real time. Just as you recall what Miles was saying, if you look out because of the hedging, if I can just come back to the additional borrowing shortly, but if you look out on the hedging on your borrowing as forecast in the LTP, your total cost of funds isn't going to move a lot, notwithstanding those interest rates. So there's that part. The reason it's not if you take some of those projects like the stadium and the theatre, quite a lot of the borrowing's already baked into that number. So what we have to then go and model is the marginal amount that we're borrowing for those projects and see how it maps, keeping in mind that some of your other revenues will also be increasing. So to your point, Councillor Piddington, it will be useful for you to see, if you like, a real-time slideshow of the revenue, the borrowings and the headroom. But it's why at the moment that, to Jason's point, that sort of 59.6 isn't quite the full story, if you like, because some of that money, because we'd already modelled that we would be borrowing X dollars for these projects, and that's baked into the models already. So that's why there's a bit more work to be done on that. It's to sort of give you an idea of where the limits are sitting at the moment, but the limits haven't been fully iterated. How that affects the models, we haven't yet worked into it, because we're trying to sort of give it a snapshot.
I think when we do that modelling, Jace, in going back 3 years, we were looking at the interest rates, and those were the bill rates and what were projected, and we know what that's going to look like moving forward. But part of that modelling might be actually what's a risk factor of 2% or something. What does that look? So that's another line of the modelling, and then that would probably everyone's sort of comfortable with that thinking, and then we know worst case scenario, another pandemic, global crisis, or what have you. We've built some risk factor in. Yeah.
And my question too, sorry, just around the modelling, and I haven't analysed our timeframes around this, but will that be before November? Because we've obviously got a major decision coming up on the theatre in November, and so what's the timing for us to see all this modelling?
So the timing is, staff yesterday started the process around building the operating and capital budget. So that'll take till the 29th of September in terms of doing that. So at that point, Bede and his leadership team will have the first time where they'll get to see what things look like. The activity management plans will come to council. I think it's planned for 5th of December is the date that we would bring, because we don't want to bring the first draft numbers because they're not going to be fantastic. And so we as an organisation will need to do some work internally. So I think it's 5 December would be when council would get the first look at the discussion. Although through all the activity management plans you would have had the chance to see what each activity was costing. But 5 December will be the time where you really get the chance to do some modelling. And look, to Councillor Piddington's point, we need to provide good quality information that has models, that has scenarios, that has risks built into it so that you can make good informed decisions. That's what we need to be doing. All right, moving on to Three Waters just quickly. So under scenario 1, scenario 1, so TDC is an NTI and the proposed go-live date is 1 July 2025. The next slide, please. The Mayor has made the decision to include Three Waters for the LTP for 10 years. And I think that's really important because having waters in or waters out from a organisational perspective is really, really difficult because we've got all these overheads, we've got all these things to do. So at this stage, we'll be including waters in the long-term plan and we can remove it if we have to because it's easier. And so we can do that after the election. Some of this information was presented to councillors in the last couple of weeks. Of the 205 million debt that we have currently, 100.4 million of it is water's debt, about 49%. So it's really significant. If water was to be excluded and that the transition happens as scheduled, our new debt would drop down from 205 to 105. Our revenue would go from the 125, less the 25 million that we receive through targeted rates and the like at the moment, down to 100. Our cap, if it was 2.8, 280% would be at 279, which would leave debt headroom of 174 million. If it was at the 210%, therefore our debt headroom would be at 104. And then there's, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with the debt to revenue rate. If it drops to 1.8 or 1.5, it changes things quite significantly. So what this sort of shows, if I even compare it to the previous slide, is that at 210%, we had, and Councillor Pennington noted, 59.6 of debt headroom. If we had Waters gone, we would have significantly more headroom. So Waters does account for $25 million of revenue, but we do have significant costs in terms of OPEX and capital coming up, which I know Vince is going to be talking to. But I'm just more alluding to the fact that Waters blues this in terms of whether it's in or out. It changes our headroom, it changes our debt levels, and it changes the way that we rate as well. If Waters was out, we might have lower rates, but the community might wear much higher charges through water charges. So we've got to think about the community rather than just what is best for this council. Financially, arguably, it's better if Waters were out, but that's not probably the right thing for the community as a whole.
Right. So I'm moving to the next scenario, which
Sorry, one question on that. Can you fund through a water rate a future project ahead of time? So rather than debt fund, just hypothetically, we're not going to do this with this one, but Claremont, it's going to cost 30 million. Could we have been saving for it under the model?
my understanding in the Rating Act is you cannot rate for a service you're not currently providing.
Right.
So I don't think you can stockpile rates for a future because something could happen. And legally, you can only rate for the current services you are providing.
Because you'd be charging the community something
totally.
that doesn't
Yeah,
exist.
that was my understanding,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't actually be the worst model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Councillor Booth?
I was just wondering about our strategy around the Three Waters when we realised that things were potentially going to change, and as they legislatively have indicated they are. Did we ramp up our infrastructure spend in order to take advantage to get the stuff in there and then unload all the debt? Was that not part of our? We did talk about that, I'm sure.
No, look, really, we proceeded on the basis that, because these projects take a long time to design and build, we don't just do them sort of overnight. And if you look at a lot of the work, such as Downlands and Parry-Aura Pipeline, they were sometime in the design and the consenting and the build and so on. And then we have always had a program of small main renewals and upgrades and so on. So, the assumption has always been, if you look into the long-term plan when we did it, that we would assume that Waters remained with us, so we continued our investment on much the same trajectory as we always had. And so that's been more or less the major project that has come in recently is the microfiltration plant that has been accelerated that was out some years, and I can't remember, was it year 6 or 7? And that's been pulled back into more or less into a current time frame. So that's really the only major project that has been accelerated in terms of our Three Waters. But a lot of those projects were already either proposed back in a number of earlier iterations of the long-term plan.
Are we basing our decisions around affordability or actually the need for the infrastructure. So like, do we actually say, okay, we can probably afford to spend 40 million, but we're actually spending 60 million? I mean, do we do a bit of a, I mean, I'm just concerned that, and I've probably said it several times, that we've gone from 30 billion up to 165 million, very short period of time. And so, and interest rates have gone through the roof. So we're potentially, you know, on that, if you put that on a graph, that looks horrible.
That was, and you were there at the last financial strategy discussions 3 years ago, that was our decision to go on that projection, to ramp up our debt to do some of those projects that we haven't done. I've still got the speaking slip.
In part, Councillor Booth, you come back to what Miles kind of said to us in terms of the costs of this. It was modelled into the long-term plan. We hedged the funding, and there hasn't been a significant movement in the interest in our cost of borrowing. It's a little bit, but not that significant. So that costing was all baked in when we set the long-term plan back in 2021 to go and ensure that those investments and into that infrastructure was made, because it was seen as enabling of economic development, value add and prosperity and so on. And so it was important to keep that infrastructure and keep investing in it. And so those were sort of the discussions that occurred at the last long-term plan, and that informed the decisions that were made.
I'd like to add that in the space of Three Waters with Te Aurama, Tamata Arawai have come in with new regulations and new standards that must be met. That will come at a cost to every council in the country, which was part of the government's argument as to why they would take it over. And you have elected that you will strive to meet those standards as an example to prove you can do it if given the proper tools and mechanisms. But every project that any council officer comes to you will have the full financial implications and the difference between what you need to do for compliance, and a lot of this water stuff is about compliance, as opposed to what's the nice to have. And sometimes the nice to have is what's going to benefit the community the best in the long run, and that's what you as governors weigh up for every decision that you make. And this LTP will be no different, particularly when we do bring the infrastructure strategy and the financial strategy to you over the next 2 months as it's developed in stages, for you to have those discussions, make those kind of decisions, and give us the direction how you want those to be structured and your policies to set that framework. Has that addressed your concern, Councillor? To be fair, it's a perfect storm that you guys are in these 2 terms of council, the previous term and this term. You've had a lot of that aging infrastructure coming to the end of its life. The projects that have been in development for the past 10 years are now coming to fruition. So you're bearing the cost of a lot of previous decisions. But you're setting up your community for a really good future. So as I said before, there are some short-term pains, but there are really good long-term gains. And there's no getting around, given the rating base you have, that only the lack of really robust government funding for everything you need to do, that you have to borrow. It's just a matter of course. So it's important that you borrow for the right reasons, for the right projects, and that's only for you guys to decide. We can just give you the best of advice and the best evidence, but you make those decisions and we will put them into action. Sir?
I just wonder, like, at the capital, what we delivered in capital expense.
Yes.
this year, I think, is it?
55 million.
55 million. What proportion of that came from the depreciation that we collected? So, I mean, I can see capital expenditure versus debt from a previous financial strategy, which shows that it shows the contribution from debt plus the depreciation fund. So, for instance, we spent 50 million. Did 20 million of that come from the depreciation fund, or 10 million going towards that asset, and then the rest, the balance, borrowed?
To be fair, I wouldn't have that information on hand. It would be something that would come through in the annual report, but I can certainly get somebody to, or,
Yeah, look, in broad order, councillor Booth, we spent all of our depreciation.
Okay.
I mean, there might have been some of the funding that might be, but in broad order, we have, because most of our depreciation is collected for water and roading, and our renewal program means that that isn't required. So essentially all of our, and we will be able to go and see if some of it was provision for particular projects, but most of it, in broad order, we spend all of our depreciation, which is why that debate we had at the annual plan, when our depreciation has risen so much because of the increase in the value of our networks, we have to keep increasing that in order to match the renewals program that comes as a result of it. So essentially, it was all spent.
We should know that number, though. We should know if we collected 15 million in depreciation, 10 million of that went towards, and perhaps some of it may have been capitalised into staff expense, which we did that a few times. So, in other words, we spent 50 million, we put 10 million of the money that we did collect for the reason of depreciation, and we borrowed the rest. And so I guess it comes down to, we are rating the people for the depreciation. All that money should be going towards the capital expense. That's the first thing goes in, and then the money borrowed over and above that to fund the requirement.
Yeah, and that happens. I don't have the numbers because we're still doing the annual report for 2023, but essentially, if you look at the high level of the financial statements, we spent all of our, if we provided for depreciation in most areas, then we would have spent it in some shape or form on capital work.
I guess if we're not doing that, the next generation are going to be subsidising this year, this group now.
I know I can speak to roading because I've been working very closely with Susie. They have spent absolutely everything and achieved pretty much all their targets in the roading framework. But we're going to come to a tension point, which I'm going to talk about shortly, is the fact that because there isn't an increase in Waka Kotahi funding, we can't maintain the current levels of service, which are particularly high with the current funding. So either you have to put more funding in, or we need to review those levels of service to see where some cost savings can be made. So we're at that point. But so roading would definitely have spent every bit of depreciation that was rated for in this term of the LTP that we're currently in. Okay. So can I go to scenario 2 if we retain the Three Waters portfolio? Okay. So the full ownership and management of Three Waters would remain with council. You assume the responsibility to invest in the Three Waters CapEx to meet those regulatory standards, which have become more stringent with the new legislation. There was a proposed program, of course, the transition unit in the DIA and the water team here under Ashley Harper, your transition manager. They put forth a big portfolio of information, budgets, and everything to go to the DIA, which did indicate there will be a significant investment needed in the next 10 years for some critical works and for some desired works, okay? So there's a range of projects in that portfolio, which if we retain, we will be looking at and scheduling over that 30-year infrastructure strategy what works would be done when, subject to the testing of their viability and end of life. We know with some of those stricter standards that there is some CapEx that will need to be done, and it will be up to you how you fund that, either through rates or through loans. But we will be striving to try and identify what those are prior to you making any decisions, and hopefully prior to the election. Our next workshop is the 10th of October, the election obviously being on the 12th. Should there be any changes, we will come back to you with revised figures, of course. There's a very optimistic view that we'll know by the 14th.
No, the election's the 14th.
Oh, the election's the 14th. Oh, okay, by the 16th. By the 16th, I think I got told previously we'll have a decision. But I think that will be very optimistic. But by the time we have the workshop in November, we should have some certainty to give you a revised picture, okay, if necessary.
It would be quite nice to have an executive summary of what Ashley's done in regards to
I can certainly
numbers.
work with the water team to provide something for you,
Well,
councillors.
considering we're probably going to end up having to
Absolutely,
look after it,
yeah.
and it's our biggest item.
It is. Now, please keep in mind, when you're proposing something, and every council has done this around the country, when you're proposing something for central government who are going to be funding it, you're putting forth your best foot, and you're putting all your nice-to-haves in there as well. And that's advocating for your community to make sure you get the lion's share, particularly for the investment put in. So, you know, there are some projects in there that are about blue sky thinking, and then there are some that are about compliance. And what you will get will be a summary to try and quantify those various projects.
Yeah, so we've done quite a bit of work in looking at that forward program for the transition unit. Yeah, so there's basically three scenarios. There's a blue sky scenario, which is the wish list. Anything that should be done is done, and that is quite unaffordable, to be honest. Then there is a lower level scenario.
Sorry, and on that, that's the 185 billion that DIA
Yes,
ended
that's
up
right,
using.
they've used that
So,
figure.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not the Australian TV program.
No. But then there's a I guess a more moderated model, which is what we should be doing, anticipating, and that's the model that we'd probably present to you. And then there's this what we're doing at the moment, current levels of service, effectively. So, you know, the model and the in between model is probably doubling expenditure, is where it's sitting at the moment. Doubling of current expenditure.
So when you say doubling, Andrew, can you give us an amount? Again, you know, we've got things in the background going on.
Yeah.
You must be able to ballpark what the additional amount is.
About 60 million over 10 years. That's total. So when we're running on around, that's not including the new stuff. That's just for renewals, effectively, and maintenance.
Yeah, that's fine.
So we're effectively, I think we're sitting around 3 million a year. So moving to 6 million a year.
That's still a massive rise in rates, isn't it? Another 6%.
Yeah.
So Mike, what's the difference between now, today, and 3 years ago with the recommendation from the water team around increase in spend in that space? Because actually I wouldn't have thought that would have changed a whole lot outside of, you know, the water reform discussion.
Yeah. It's basically lifting the renewals and how much renewal work we're doing. There's a lot of compliance.
I guess my question is, it's more of a priority now, but it wasn't 3 years ago.
No.
Why?
The drinking water standards have increased.
Okay, so it's driven around standards.
Yeah, and there is those standards include, you know, number of outages that are acceptable. You can't have water outages for any length of time without being reported. Yeah, so the
For our,
regulatory framework is tightened right up.
yeah, no, I get that. So I think for our understanding, I think we want to know what I think we want a good visual over all three models.
Yeah.
Yes, present us the middle model, but actually what's the blue sky and why, and what's the sweat the asset model, so we can understand the thinking around the three, if you like. And we don't, and conscious of the information, or the work to provide that information. But you know the sorts of questions we ask, so what you should do by now. So, yeah, I'll go to you, Alan.
Yeah, it's a bit of a continuum where you want to land, you know, and we'll give you all the different scenarios. And,
I guess it probably should be driven by a requirement to the new authority, what standards we need to attain, and we base that, and so we try and reach those standards, but over a period of time. I'm sure they're going to give us a period of time to achieve that. It might be 10 years, for instance.
I think it's important to note too that we're not just talking about water supply here, drinking water, we're talking about wastewater. You know, Tamara are just embarking on that now, and so there's going to be a whole suite of new standards, new requirements come through for wastewater, and likewise stormwater is the other one that's a bit of an unknown at the moment. So it's in, yeah, with the new consents that we're having to go for, there could be a lot of increased costs there.
And my understanding is they haven't really touched on stormwater yet. It's still in the two hard baskets. So they're working hard in wastewater and stormwater. That might be another 5 or 6 years away. We don't know. What's really important is that part of your support for the C4LD principle about keeping it was they talked about a proposal of having a national entity similar to Waka Kotahi that you could apply for funding. That becomes so much more critical to help you achieve what you want to for your community without passing on all the costs to them directly. So the lobbying and advocacy for that type of funding mechanism from central government will become much more critical and a key role, particularly for the Canterbury Mayoral Forum. So I'll move on to, if the Three Waters stays with TGC, this is the impact on your debt, remains at 205. Your debt headroom at 280% goes down to 145. And if you retain your debt cap in your policy, the headroom goes down to 57 million. And it's important to note that your 25 million revenue that you currently get will stay. Your current levels of expenditure on CapEx is 26 million, but there's another 14 million on OpEx. So it roughly costs about 40 million on this financial year. So when we're looking at revenue and expenditure, you are investing in water currently. And you're doing that to help meet standards, help to repair some of the old infrastructure that's met the end of its life, and protecting your community's future.
Increased resilience.
And increasing the resilience, which is protecting your community's future.
Andrew, am I right, generally speaking, out taking stormwater? I mean, 6 years ago when I came into local government, we were talking about stormwater and what was on the horizon, and nothing's happened since then. And so I agree it's probably going to be another 5 or 6 years. And we've got money in the later years for stormwater improvements too, haven't we? I'm not sure if we know what to do with them. But am I right in thinking that the next 10 years is, because of the work that we've done on Parara Pipeline, take out Claremont, we've done some of the other plants, it's going to be focused on small main renewal. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have to say that, you know, it's our water asset is going to be in a really good space in the future. You know, we've spent a lot of money on that area. It is going to be very robust, and, you know, it's really good. So, but yeah, so the next step will be looking at the wastewater, and that's potentially some very large costs coming through there, and later that the stormwater. So, yeah,
When do we
revolving program.
discuss the? I see you've put there, you know, the first thing you've written is 280%, and then you put our self-imposed debt cap. So I mean, that doesn't move that self-imposed debt cap unless we have an agreement around this table, is that correct? That's right. Yeah, good.
So those parameters that Jason showed earlier are ones that we'll be considering, but we're always going to be at the point where we'd have to be considering that debt cap for this. And 3 years ago, we knew that. Yes.
You can actually choose to make your debt cap the same as the LGFA one, or you can tighten it. It is a fluid, completely dependent on your desires and the goals you set for yourselves. And that will be part of the discussion on the 10th of October when the policies come to you, because it's in one of those policies that debt cap is actually set. Okay?
Just on stormwater, some years ago, and I can't remember, I think it might have been 2018, long-term plan, we started to increase the investment in stormwater, and our stormwater management plans do signal a significantly enhanced level of service. And you see that when consents come up or there's subdivisions or something like that, there's an expectation of a higher standard around attenuation and what goes into the receiving environment. So while it might be some time, that stormwater investment is starting now, but it might be some time before the full effect of it is felt through the revenue expenditure and the balance sheet lines. But there's no doubt that for a long time I think it was seen as the poor relation, and that is change of the three waters, and that is changing.
I think we can agree a lot of that is changing because we're having more heavy rain events and it's becoming a higher feature. So, and we're working on the resilience to that, sir. Okay.
And all this leads to a big headache. So Nigel there looks like he's got a bit of a headache. Councillors do, and I think staff probably do as well. We've got a lot of financial challenges. If we look at the reforms uncertainty of water and RMA, we've got the effective timing of water, whether it's in or out.
That's not your avatar, sir.
I'm not going to comment on that. And we've got the ongoing inflation, labour market constraints, interest rates, they're all carrying on. Our projected rates are too high. When we did the 23-24 annual plan, of course, at the same time we'd plan out the 10 years. So rates are double digits if we don't do something. Our proposed capital program needs to be deliverable, that's fine, but also needs to be affordable. Last year, yep, we delivered 55. I think the plan was in the 80s, and that was partly due to some timing differences with the theatre in Egantai. But we need to make sure it's deliverable and affordable. So we really do have some challenges, which we'll talk about on the next slides in terms of how we're hoping to resolve some of them.
The infrastructure challenges. I've highlighted that there will be some high needs for some major CapEx investment, especially when we move into that wastewater space, and in future when we move into the stormwater space. There is still a question mark around the uncertainty and timing around affordable waters legislation and the future of that. Your CapEx costs keep rising for a variety of factors, and when we defer CapEx and think, okay, well, we can sweat out the assets a little longer, it does have a consequential effect on increasing your OPEX. And an example of that, like with Peel Forest, we have done mitigation effects, sometimes $500,000 a year, to protect that until we had the means to work on the big CapEx costs, which is to move that. So every time you defer a project, there will be a subsequent cost. I've talked about the roading and footpaths funding shortfalls with the current levels of service. Your roading team does punch above its weight. I really do commend them for what it is that they do. I know that there is grievance around unsealed roads. That's in every district, I can assure you. And they become a particular issue, especially during the dry season, and then you have a rain and more potholes appear. So your complaints do go up. There is a cycle of that. We also have more closed landfills that we know we will need to address as we go through the work program assessing them. And at the moment, there's no current source of external funding through the Ministry for the Environment, but I know the Mayor and the Canterbury Mayoral Forum are working on various campaigns to lobby central government with waiving waste levy fees, setting up a specialized fund for closed landfills, and we're also looking at how we can expedite the resource consent procedure around those so that we can actually look to taking action necessarily without the unintended consequences of having an extended resource consent process. So,
Sure, the Nathan's interested in that.
yeah, well, there are every council around the country, and we have the added benefit that the mayor has had direct conversations with ministers around this, and the Canterbury Mayoral Forum have already written to the Minister of the Environment, and he's looking favorably on some of the suggestions that have been put forward. So, and the rest of the country is looking to us to see how that goes. And they'll all get behind and support, but very few of them are the ones front-footing it. Okay.
So we have a number of levers and options that we really need to be looking at, and I think there's about 6, which I just want to talk through today. First one is really around OPEX, around priority OPEX. And look, I'd put a challenge out firstly to SLT and then to Council through that we need to look really hard at our BAU in terms of what we do, how we deliver it, and what can we do differently. So as I mentioned, staff are at the moment working through creating the budgets, and so SLT will go through and rigorously critique those. And then Council, when you receive your activity management plan, same thing. Very easy to add things in, but we need to really look at what we can hold, what we can reduce. We need to look at decreasing expenditure. We need some suppression. We need some cost control in certain areas. We need to ensure that our fees and charges are actually recovering our costs that they're meant to be recovering. OPEX is a big part of our business. 128 million of revenue, 122 million of expenditure. If we can suppress some of that, if we can focus it, then that will certainly help out. Next slide is around prioritising CapEx. Look, we've got the Theatre Royal and Heritage Hub decision coming up, as Councillor Scott mentioned before. Again, that's an interesting decision. We've already sunk a lot of money into it in terms of the 11.6 million from MB and additional funding. So it's very difficult to change an approved council project, and it really needs to be more than just a minor cost increase. It needs to be some significant some changes, but again, that'll come back to council for decision. But capital is much more than that. Do we sweat our assets further? Not really productive sometimes. Council have worked before. Some of them do last longer, but we really need to make sure that our capital program is fit for purpose. Are we assessing the condition correctly? We've got a bit of economic growth going on. We really need to focus on that as well. What's nice to have? Can we do everything? These are the questions that the council is going to have to ask on the way through. Do we defer increased rating for renewals now, but then we're just pushing more costs onto future residents? We've talked about prudence, we've talked about fairness, we've talked about equity. Is there a trade-off given our current investment in long-lived assets? We really need to be considering some of those areas. We've got options around recycling capital, increased surplus land sales. So we have some surplus land from time to time. Do we keep it in-house? Do we use that for savings? Do we offset some of our other challenges that we're facing at the moment? We really do need to review levels of service and understand what our trade-offs are. And look, I can't reiterate this enough. And I've been around local government enough to know that it's very hard for councils to reduce the levels of service. But we really need to review. Even if we're keeping it at the status quo, we need to understand what the implications are on that. We've got significant cost escalation. We need to think, is this what the community needs? We need to hear from the community. Is this what they want? So we really do need to understand all the trade-offs. One option is to introduce new revenue streams. Always a bit of a challenge, as the Mayor's referred to. A lot of them do need government action, government intervention. The way that local government's working at the moment, is it really the right fit for the right outcome we're trying to achieve? We need to look at development contributions at some stage. It's a source of revenue which most councils have that stream. We don't at this point in time. So we really do need to focus on some of these new revenues. And I think finally, we can increase rates beyond a normal level. We went out 11.1 as part of the annual plan. That was really high. And that was even a constrained number in terms of what the organisation probably needed. We're already at peak rates. That's already unpopular. And I guess my last point is it may be less visible if affordable waters kicks in, because of course we might have water charges, so there might be an entity charging our community through that, and so our rates might be less, so it's less visible, but it's still an impact on the community. So I guess I'm challenging the organisation with BEAD and the SLT. I'm challenging councillors that we really do need to, we can't carry on with what we're doing. So we need to ask some hard questions, and we need to be very challenging. And to Councillor Paddington's points, you need the evidence, you need the data, you need the scenario planning in order to make some decent decisions. Because the financial strategy is your decision. We will implement it, we'll make it work, but really councillors need to implement the financial strategy as your guiding document.
I see you put a question mark after already at peak rates, and that's a good discussion, and I think we need to bring some analysis in. Our ratepayers would tell us we are, but you know, picking up from the last taxpayer survey, which takes us through to first of or end of financial middle of 22, is looking at the other provincial councils, so providing like services. There's 2 councils out of the 23 that didn't provide the data, but we were 3rd lowest. And so I think as part of this, it would be interesting to just do some comparisons. I know it's not easy, but as an example, Waitaki have higher rates, but they're not providing, waste services. So how do we get some of that analysis and tell the story to our ratepayers around the value that they are actually getting for the rates?
Yeah, and look, that's a fantastic point. And look, I've worked in a few councils where they do provide some of that comparison information, because, look, arguably this council is wearing some of the decisions from many, many years ago council, where there were 0 rates, there was 1-2%, which were outstanding at the time. But our base is so low that if we do an 11.1% increase, which council did, it takes us up a bit, but it's still, our base is still very low compared to similar type councils. And so when you're putting them up at 10%, there's a headline number. Yeah, it's loud and it hurts. But our base and our community have almost been, it's artificially low, but it's very hard for a current council to fix overnight.
And the challenge, sorry, I'll let you go. And the challenge with that is telling our story, isn't it? So how do we have those direct comms with the community? Because the challenge is relying on, and it's not right or wrong, but we can't be reliant on, the Herald as an example to tell our story, because that's never going to get printed that we've got low rates. So
that comes to the engagement strategy. That's when we have you front and center telling that story to the community. And we will be coming to you with a few ideas about how it is that you're going to interact with the public, because we will make sure you have everything you need. But the message really needs to come from you, all of you, to your constituents, to let them know Timaru's in pretty good shape. They get a lot for their rates. It's just not always recognized. And let's be fair, in every provincial community, a council's a very easy news piece, and your rates is always a very popular thing to discuss in the media. When you get to the bigger towns, it's usually either the council or the hospital board. I think what's really important is we control the narrative. So we go out there with the good stories. We go out there saying we've delivered a much higher level of service in roads and in our water and in some of our community services. You know, you have really high-class facilities, particularly things like your library and the art gallery and what you're proposing to do for your theater. And it's about the community feeling that they get value for their rates. And that's the part where you have a lot more to contribute to fill out that part of the story, because that doesn't tend to make those media headlines. So when you're out there talking to the community, we will make sure you have the right material to present to them, and it's about you delivering it. And we'll get you out there in the right places, at the right venues, and right events where the people are. Rather than making the people come to you at a community hall, we will go to where the people are.
I guess just thinking about the Three Waters and the impact that it would have had on the price of water, if it's obviously gone through, but if it were to proceed, you can be assured that the water prices or to our ratepayers would actually more than double. And if that model that has been used and what they want to do, they will be having to operate with some form of profit in there, as well as paying for a whole lot of people that are doing nothing. We are delivering at cost. And I know that we are not charging enough, in my mind, certainly for our commercial users, for water usage. And so there are opportunities. What if it actually those water charges, I'm sure they would double.